In this video, you'll witness the story of Henry and Elizabeth, a couple whose lives are turned upside down after a simple bottle of wine becomes the starting point for winning a $100 million lottery prize. But what seemed like the solution to all their problems soon becomes the beginning of a series of challenges. Henry believes that with the fortune, he can win back his wife and reunite the family by buying a luxurious mansion and providing everything they've ever dreamed of. However, will luxury and wealth bring back the happiness they lost? Amid glamorous parties and extravagant shopping, Henry and Elizabeth start to realize something is deeply wrong. The money, which was supposed to bring them closer, is actually pushing everyone further apart. The children, once humble, now demand more and more, and the distance between the couple grows with each passing day. The fortune may have given them everything money can buy, but has it taken away what money can't replace? As tension rises, an unexpected twist occurs, and the same bottle of wine that started this journey returns to close the cycle in a surprising way. Will Henry and Elizabeth manage to recover what truly matters before it's too late? The answer will reveal the true value of life and human relationships. Stay until the end to find out how, after so much pain, they finally find redemption in something far simpler than they ever imagined. Henry Stokes, a 45-year-old man, felt the weight of the world on his shoulders as he sat at the kitchen table. The small house, once his refuge, now felt like a suffocating prison. The walls, which had once held laughter and cheerful conversations, now echoed the deafening sound of silence, broken only by the ticking clock marking each passing second. Beside him, Elizabeth, his wife, kept her gaze fixed on a pile of overdue bills, her fingers trembling slightly as she held one of them. The tears in her eyes did not escape Henry's attention, who knew exactly what he was about to hear.
Henry.
Elizabeth began, her voice wavering. She took a deep breath before continuing, as if gathering courage.
We need to make cuts, severe cuts.
She struggled to maintain her composure, but it was evident that the situation was wearing her down.
We can't keep doing this, mortgaging our house repeatedly. We're going to lose everything if we continue this way.
Henry felt his chest tighten. The reality of what she was saying was undeniable. He was on his second mortgage, and the months of overdue payments to the bank were piling up like an impending death sentence. Each word from Elizabeth pierced his heart, as if she were tearing apart the little hope he still had. He knew his wife was right, but the feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. He, who had always prided himself on being the provider, now found himself unable to protect his family from the financial collapse that was approaching.
I know, Liz. I know.
Henry's voice was a whisper, laden with pain and resignation. He wanted to be strong for her, but the circumstances were robbing him of strength, pride, and even dignity. Elizabeth's tear-filled eyes met his. There was no need for more words. They both knew they were trapped in a downward spiral with little chance of recovery. The next day, Henry left home with a shopping list in hand, written by Elizabeth in shaky handwriting. She had carefully detailed each item, ensuring that only the essentials were included. Henry read the list several times as he walked to the supermarket. It was short and practical, just rice, beans, milk, and bread. Nothing more, nothing but the absolutely necessary. Inside the supermarket, Henry pushed the cart slowly down the aisles, his mind absorbed in the problems surrounding them. The shelves full of bright, colorful products seemed to mock him, offering luxury and comfort that he knew he couldn't provide for his family. He tried to focus on the list, to grab the rice, to choose the cheapest bread. But as he turned a corner, something caught his eye: a bottle of wine. It was the same brand that he and Elizabeth used to buy on special occasions, in times when small moments of happiness were still possible. Without thinking, Henry reached out and grabbed the bottle, holding it as if it were an artifact from a distant past. The golden label shimmered in the supermarket light, bringing back memories of birthdays, romantic dinners, and simple celebrations that now seemed like a lifetime ago. Henry placed the bottle in the cart, feeling a strange mix of nostalgia and despair. It was an impulsive, irrational gesture, and he knew it. But at that moment, he needed to feel that he still had some control, that he could still provide something that would bring joy, no matter how small. However, when he arrived home, Elizabeth's reaction was anything but what he expected.
Henry, what is this?
Elizabeth exclaimed, her eyes wide in disbelief as she saw the bottle of wine. She looked incredulous, almost stunned.
We're struggling to survive, and you buy this?
Shame burned within Henry, and he knew he had made a grave mistake. He tried to explain, but Elizabeth didn't want to hear it.
We don't have money for luxuries. You need to return this immediately.
The firmness in her voice was unshakable, and Henry, defeated, knew she was right. He felt the guilt weighing on him like an anchor, pulling him further down. That afternoon, Henry returned to the supermarket, the bottle of wine in hand. Each step toward the return counter felt like dragging his feet. He felt small, ashamed, as if everyone around him knew how close he was to rock bottom. He waited in line, his gaze fixed on the floor, trying to ignore the distant murmurs and laughter echoing through the aisles. While he waited, something caught his attention. A large lottery poster affixed to the wall near the checkout. The numbers shone in large letters, announcing a prize of $100 million. For a brief moment, Henry imagined what life would be like without the worries that plagued him. The idea of a sudden change, a magical solution to all his problems, was tempting. He looked at the bottle in his hands and, in an impulse he couldn't control, decided he would use the refund money to buy 3 lottery tickets. When he finally reached the counter, he returned the wine without hesitation and asked for the tickets. The clerk, unaware of Henry's emotional roller coaster, handed over the tickets with a standard smile. Henry tucked them into his wallet, still incredulous about his own decision. As he walked home, a small glimmer of hope began to grow inside him, fighting against the weight of reality. That night, lying in bed, Henry held his wallet tightly, as if those pieces of paper were his last line of defense against the despair that threatened to consume him. He didn't tell Elizabeth about the tickets. Instead, he kept the secret and the hope, letting tomorrow bring whatever it could. Morning dawned slowly, with the first rays of sunlight filtering through the kitchen window as Henry sat, engulfed in thoughts that would not give him a break. He held the coffee cup with both hands, trying to extract some comfort from the heat emanating from the drink. But inside, the cold of fear and uncertainty persisted. The impulsive decision of the previous night would not leave his mind. 3 lottery tickets, bought in the heat of a moment of desperation. What was he thinking? The television, playing at a low volume, murmured the morning news in the background, but Henry was not paying attention. Until suddenly, something caught his attention. The voice of the presenter announced the winning lottery numbers. Henry froze. He felt a wave of nervousness wash over him as he reached for his wallet in the back pocket of his pants. With slightly trembling hands, he pulled out the tickets and placed them on the table in front of him. Taking a deep breath, he picked up the first ticket and began to compare the numbers. The silence in the kitchen seemed to amplify each rapid heartbeat. The first ticket had nothing. No numbers matched. He swallowed hard and moved on to the second ticket, with a thread of hope still clinging to his mind. Once again, nothing. Henry closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of disappointment mixed with a sense of inevitability. But there was still 1 ticket left, and he gathered the last reserves of courage to check the numbers. As he compared them one by one, Henry could hardly believe what he was seeing. The numbers, they matched. Each one of them. His hand began to shake violently. It was as if time had stopped and the sound around him completely extinguished. Henry let the ticket drop, floating gently to the floor.
I won, Liz.
He whispered, but his voice was so low that he could barely hear it himself, let alone his wife, who was still in the bedroom. The low, anxious whispers of Henry from the kitchen finally drew Elizabeth, who, still sleepy, stepped out of the bedroom. Her bare feet barely made a sound as she crossed the hall, her heart beating a little faster than normal. Upon reaching the kitchen, Elizabeth stopped at the entrance, watching Henry, who stood at the table with a look of complete disbelief on his face. Something was deeply wrong, or perhaps right? She couldn't decipher.
Henry? What's going on?
She asked, concern lacing her voice as she tried to understand what could have caused such a reaction in her husband. Henry, still dazed, slowly turned to her, his eyes wide, breath quickening.
Liz, I think we won.
The words barely left his mouth, as if he wasn't sure he was actually saying that. Emotions swirled on Elizabeth's face, first relief, then disbelief, and finally, palpable fear.
How much, Henry? How much did you win?
She asked, her voice barely containing the tension that was building inside her, a tension that threatened to suffocate her. Henry, still trying to process what was happening, took a deep breath, trying to articulate the magnitude of the moment.
$100 million, Liz. 100 million.
His voice came out almost like a whisper, laden with a mix of euphoria and dread. He could hardly believe the words he had just spoken. Elizabeth, still incredulous, approached slowly, as if fearing that any sudden movement might shatter the enchantment of that surreal moment. Without taking her eyes off Henry, she picked up the ticket from the table. Her mind spun as her eyes scanned the numbers with almost mechanical precision, and suddenly, reality hit. Elizabeth's hands began to tremble as she read and reread the numbers. Her expression changed drastically, from initial disbelief to total shock.
Henry, we won!
She shouted, her voice overflowing with emotion as tears began to roll freely down her face. Henry and Elizabeth embraced, but the hug was frantic, a reflection of the emotional storm that engulfed them, a fierce mix of joy, relief, and a deep fear of what was to come. The moment was surreal, almost unreal. Henry, still euphoric and trying to absorb what had just happened, held Elizabeth's face in his hands, his eyes shining with a new light.
Thank you for making me return the wine, Liz. If it weren't for you,
he said, the gratitude in his voice palpable. Both knew in that instant that their lives had changed forever. But at the same time, a chill ran down their spines, for they had no idea what this change would truly mean for them. The future was now a great question mark, bright yet also frighteningly uncertain. The shock had not yet worn off when Henry and Elizabeth, hours later, found themselves at the bank, sitting in the waiting room, awaiting their turn to be seen by the manager. The cold, impersonal atmosphere of the bank contrasted starkly with the storm of emotions the two felt inside. Each second seemed to drag on endlessly until they were finally called to enter Mr. Patterson's office. The manager, a middle-aged man with an air of calculated professionalism, greeted them with a mix of respect and curiosity. He had already received news about the winners, but seeing the couple before him brought a touch of reality to the situation. Henry and Elizabeth sat facing the manager, barely able to believe they were there. Mr. Patterson began to explain the process with a calmness that seemed almost disconnected from the magnitude of what was happening.
Well, Mr. and Mrs. Stokes, first of all, congratulations on the prize. It is indeed $100 million.
The mention of the amount made Henry and Elizabeth exchange glances, a mix of panic and joy dancing on their faces. As Mr. Patterson explained the options for receiving the money and talked about investments, financial security, and future plans, Henry could hardly hear the words. His mind was spinning around the fact that, in a matter of hours, his life had taken such a sharp turn that he didn't know how to process it. He looked at Elizabeth, who was trying to focus on the manager's words, but was clearly as dazed as he was. When they finally left the bank, the sunlight seemed brighter, more intense, almost blinding. Henry stopped on the sidewalk, taking a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts that assailed him. Elizabeth looked at him, her eyes still wide.
This is going to change everything, Liz.
Henry said, still unable to believe the words coming out of his mouth. Elizabeth simply nodded, squeezing his hand tightly, both knowing that as a new chapter in their lives began, The pages yet to come would be filled with uncertainties and challenges they could never have foreseen. The days following the confirmation of their fortune were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. With the money now in their accounts, Henry and Elizabeth experienced the first wave of their new life, an almost intoxicating feeling of infinite possibilities. However, for Henry, the initial excitement soon gave way to an unexpected feeling of discomfort. He allowed himself to take some time off work, something he had never imagined doing before. Yet, instead of enjoying this newfound freedom, Henry felt restless, as if something vital was missing. The routine that had once trapped him now seemed to be the only thing anchoring him to reality. Without it, Henry found himself disoriented, floating in a life that didn't feel like his own. Elizabeth, on the other hand, seemed more at ease with the new situation. She quickly began making immediate plans, renovations on the house, purchases of items that had once been distant dreams. They talked about exotic trips, the possibility of buying a bigger house, even investing in a second property. But behind Elizabeth's words, Henry sensed an underlying tension, a persistent feeling that something was out of place. It was as if, despite all the wealth, an invisible shadow loomed over them, a doubt that could not be expressed in words but was present in every decision, in every exchanged glance. Henry couldn't shake the feeling that the freedom and financial security they had achieved were crumbling into something he could not control. He tried to distract himself with small projects around the house, but the disorientation was constant. The absence of purpose began to corrode his peace of mind. And with each new suggestion from Elizabeth to spend the money, that feeling intensified, as if they were drifting away from what truly mattered. The conversations that once revolved around survival and hope now centered on luxuries that didn't bring the same satisfaction. As the days went by, the relationship between Henry and Elizabeth began to wear thin. Previously, financial struggles had kept them united in a common purpose, keeping the family afloat, weathering economic storms. Now, with an abundance of resources, they found themselves on opposite sides, each trying to cope with the new landscape in their own way. Elizabeth, ever practical, was focused on securing their children's future. She constantly spoke about safe investments, savings plans, and the need to ensure the money lasted forever. For her, it was a matter of protecting what they had achieved and guaranteeing that their children would never have to face the hardships they had endured. Henry, however, found it difficult to engage in practical discussions. Instead, he felt compelled to reconnect with the simple life they had lost. He didn't want just financial security. He wanted to find some meaning in the wealth they now possessed. But every time he tried to express this, it resulted in arguments with Elizabeth. The pressure to decide what to do with so much money was pulling them apart, and the conversations that had once revolved around hope and survival had now become sources of conflict and tension. At one point, during one of these arguments, Elizabeth could no longer hold back her frustration.
You're not the same, Henry. This money, it has changed you, and not for the better.
The words, laden with pain and disillusionment, struck Henry like a blow. He didn't respond immediately, but the weight of Elizabeth's accusation left him speechless. She was right. He had changed, but he didn't know how or why. All he knew was that, despite all the money, he felt more lost than ever. The silence that followed Elizabeth's accusation was suffocating, leaving a space between them that had once been filled by their shared struggle. Now it seemed that money had created a distance that Henry didn't know how to bridge. The change affected not only Henry and Elizabeth. Sophie and Lucas, who had once been simple and understanding children, also began to show signs of transformation. The new financial reality brought with it new desires, and quickly the children started to behave differently. Sophie, always focused on her studies and reserved by nature, began asking for expensive clothes and luxurious trips with her friends. She felt drawn to a world of glamour that had previously been inaccessible to her, and the newfound wealth seemed to open doors to that life. Lucas, who had always been modest in his needs, now demanded the latest gadgets and toys that had previously existed only in his fantasies. The change in the children's behavior worried Elizabeth. who saw it as a reflection of the larger problems the family was facing. She tried to impose limits, telling Sophie that she didn't need expensive clothes to be happy, and attempting to explain to Lucas that satisfaction didn't come from having the newest toy. But her words seemed to lose their power in the face of the allure of new desires, and each attempt to set boundaries was met with resistance and frustration. Henry, on the other hand, felt guilty for the years of deprivation and hardships his children had endured. He gave in to every request, unable to say no. The guilt consumed him, and he believed he could make up for years of hardship by giving them everything they asked for. However, this approach only exacerbated the tensions within the house. The atmosphere, which had once been charged with the struggle for survival, was now filled with a new kind of tension, where differing visions of how to handle wealth were eroding the fabric of the family. With each passing day, Henry felt more disconnected from his own family. The house, which had once been a refuge, now felt like an emotional battlefield, where every decision, every expenditure, became a matter of confrontation. The feeling of being adrift in a life he didn't recognize, a life that should be filled with joy and satisfaction, but was marked by conflict and dissatisfaction, grew stronger with each moment. And deep down, Henry feared that the price of wealth might be the loss of everything that truly mattered. After the revelation of winning the lottery, Henry and Elizabeth found themselves suddenly catapulted into a life they had never imagined. Despite initial hesitation and internal conflicts, Henry believed that a significant change could be the key to rekindling the family unity that seemed to be unraveling. With that in mind, he decided that buying a mansion would be the first step. For him, the grandeur of their new home would be a declaration of his love for Elizabeth and a way to offer her and their children a life they had always deserved but never had. The choice of the mansion was made with care. It was an imposing property located in an exclusive neighborhood, featuring vast gardens, a sparkling pool, and more rooms than they could ever need. Elizabeth was dazzled the first time she set foot in the property. The large glass windows that let light flood the rooms, the high ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers, and the white marble flooring exuded an opulence that made her feel like the protagonist of a life she had only known through movies. For Henry, seeing Elizabeth smile again, exploring the mansion with bright eyes, was a temporary relief.
I did this for you, Liz.
He said, holding her hand as they looked out at the view from the balcony.
I hope this helps us start over, to reconnect our family.
Elizabeth looked at him, and for a moment, Henry saw the shadow of the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago.
It's wonderful, Henry. Thank you for thinking of us.
But behind her words, there was an invisible tension, a disconnection that the grandeur of the mansion could not heal. Henry knew this on some level, but chose to believe that material comfort and luxury could fill the gaps that were opening between them. The mansion, with all its beauty, became a symbol of their attempts to restore something that was slipping away, a desperate effort to hold on to what was already slipping through their fingers. With the move to the mansion came the luxuries that Henry and Elizabeth had never experienced. Elizabeth quickly became involved in decorating the numerous rooms, spending exorbitant sums on designer furniture, rare artworks, and luxury items that transformed the house into a true palace. Henry, in turn, thought that allowing these expenses could bring the satisfaction and happiness they were so desperately seeking. He hired a private chef, bought sports cars, and even purchased a boat that was docked at an exclusive marina. Their children, Sophie and Lucas, also quickly adapted to their new lifestyle. Sophie, enchanted by the glamour that wealth provided, dove into a world of luxurious parties and extravagant shopping. She traded her former simplicity for designer clothes and international trips, believing that these luxuries could give her the sense of belonging she had always desired. Lucas, still young, began demanding the latest technology, expensive video games, and even private sports lessons for activities he didn't even like, but that his new friends considered essential. However, despite the abundance of luxuries, the family was not more united. Henry noticed that instead of drawing closer, the members of his family were becoming increasingly isolated. Meals, once moments for conversation and connection, became silent, or were completely replaced by individual dinners in front of large television screens. Elizabeth, wrapped in her bubble of new expensive hobbies, emotionally distanced herself from Henry. And although Henry had hoped that the luxurious life would bring happiness, he realized that it was merely a facade, a false shine that, instead of illuminating their lives, was blinding them to what truly mattered. The new routine in the mansion soon established itself, but it was very different from the life that Henry and Elizabeth had known before winning the lottery. Mornings, which once began with breakfast together in their small kitchen, were now solitary. Elizabeth spent hours in the private spa while Henry took long drives in search of meaning in his new life. The children, always surrounded by their latest acquisitions, isolated themselves in their rooms, each in their own world of digital distractions and superficialities. Henry tried to get involved in new activities, but nothing seemed to fill the void he felt. He joined exclusive clubs, attended parties and social events, but never felt like he belonged in that world. The days were long and empty, and the mansion, which he had imagined would be a vibrant home, became merely an echoing space of solitude. At night, Henry and Elizabeth barely saw each other. She spent her time engrossed in TV series or books, while he stayed in his office, lost in thought, trying to understand how they had reached that point. In a moment of introspection, Henry realized that the routine they had built after winning the lottery was a distorted reflection of everything they had dreamed of. He recognized that in his quest to please his family and fill the emotional gaps with material possessions, he had lost the sense of who they were. The mansion, the luxuries, the glamorous routine, all of it was nothing more than a desperate attempt to escape a painful truth. They had drifted away from what truly mattered. The wealth, which he believed to be the solution, had turned into a veil that hid the real problems, and now Henry felt more lost than ever. The news of the Stokes' sudden wealth spread quickly throughout the town and beyond. Soon enough, Henry and Elizabeth began receiving phone calls and visits from friends and relatives they hadn't seen in years. Each came bearing sad stories of hardships and requests for help. Some were old acquaintances facing financial troubles. Others were distant relatives who, until then, barely remembered Henry's existence. Each had a convincing justification for needing assistance, and Henry, always generous by nature, felt obligated to lend a hand. He had always believed that if he was in a position to help, he should do so. However, the growing line of people knocking at their door began to worry Elizabeth.
Henry, this is getting out of hand.
She said one night after yet another unexpected visitor had left.
These people, some of them barely spoke to us before. Now, all of a sudden, everyone needs money. We need to be careful.
Henry looked at her, torn between his desire to help and Elizabeth's concern.
But, Liz, what if they really need it? I can't just turn my back on them.
Elizabeth sighed, clearly struggling to find the right words.
I understand, Henry, but they're just after our money. It's not our responsibility to solve everyone's problems. We have to think about our family first.
Elizabeth's warning resonated with wisdom, but Henry felt suffocated by the guilt of refusing help, especially to those who had once stood by his side. As the days passed, more and more people showed up with requests for help. Each new story touched Henry differently. Some evoked memories of tough times in his own life, while others stirred a natural empathy he had always possessed. Elizabeth watched all of this with growing concern, fearing that Henry's sense of obligation would ultimately ruin them. She clearly saw what Henry seemed unable to recognize. Many were taking advantage of his generosity, putting them in a vulnerable position. The tension between the couple heightened with each new plea for assistance, and Henry began to feel increasingly torn between his desire to do good and his fear of disappointing Elizabeth. As if the situation wasn't complicated enough, one day, someone from Henry's past appeared at the Stokes' door. Marjorie, the former neighbor from the house where Henry and Elizabeth had raised their children. Marjorie was an elderly lady who had always been a loving figure in their lives. especially when the kids were small. She had moved away a few years ago, and since then, they had lost touch. Marjorie arrived with a weary look, clearly worn down by age and health. She explained that she needed urgent surgery but had no way to pay for it. Henry felt a wave of nostalgia and affection upon seeing her. After all, Marjorie had been a kind of substitute grandmother to their children. Without a second thought, he agreed to help.
Of course, Marjorie. Whatever you need, count on us.
He said with a determination that left no room for discussion. But Elizabeth, who had overheard the conversation, couldn't remain silent.
Henry, can we talk for a minute?
She asked, pulling him aside. When they were alone, Elizabeth was direct.
I know Marjorie is important to you, but we're putting ourselves in danger by helping everyone like this. What if the money runs out? We can't save the world.
Henry, however, was not willing to listen.
Liz, it's Marjorie. She took care of our kids. I can't just ignore her.
The tension was palpable. Elizabeth saw in Henry a stubbornness she had never noticed before, and she began to worry deeply. She knew that in his desire to help, Henry was exposing himself to risks he couldn't foresee. But seeing the determined look in his eyes, Elizabeth realized there was little she could do to change his mind. Henry's decision created a deep rift between them. Elizabeth felt she was losing Henry to a generosity that, in her eyes, bordered on irresponsibility. She wondered how far this would go and whether Henry would realize the danger before it was too late. As if the situation wasn't complicated enough, days later Henry received an unexpected visit from Peter, an old schoolmate. Peter, who had once been a great friend, was now in a desperate situation. He explained to Henry that he had lost everything in a failed business venture and needed an investment to restart. The request deeply affected Henry, bringing back memories of the times when he and Peter were inseparable. The possibility of helping an old friend rekindled in Henry the desire to do something meaningful with his newfound fortune. He felt that by helping Peter, he could rediscover part of who he was before all the wealth. However, when Henry told Elizabeth about Peter's proposal, her reaction was immediate and fierce.
Henry, you're playing with fire!
She exclaimed, unable to contain her frustration.
You've barely spoken to him in recent years, and now you're going to give him a large sum of money without considering the consequences? We've already helped so many people. Can't you see we're being exploited?
Henry tried to argue, but Elizabeth's words echoed in his mind, causing him a deep sense of guilt.
Liz, I just wanted to help a friend who has always been there for me in the past.
He said, his voice filled with hesitation.
You need to stop thinking with your heart and start thinking about our family.
Elizabeth retorted, her voice trembling with the intensity of the argument.
I won't let you put everything we've worked for at risk over a whim. Think about our kids, about our future.
The conflict between Henry's desire to help and Elizabeth's fear of losing everything created an unbearable tension. After a long and painful discussion, Henry, with a heavy heart, made the difficult decision to decline Peter's offer.
I'm sorry, Peter, but I can't do this.
He said, avoiding his friend's disappointed gaze. When Peter left, Henry felt a bitter mix of relief and regret. He knew that Elizabeth was right to protect their family's future, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that he was drifting away from who he was. The argument with Elizabeth left a deep scar in their relationship, and Henry began to question how far wealth had eroded his priorities and values. He felt trapped between his own identity and the new responsibilities that money had brought, unsure of how to reconcile the two. The growing distance between Henry and Elizabeth had become unbearable, an abyss that seemed to widen with each passing day. The constant tension, the arguments, and the weight of financial decisions transformed their home into a place of conflict and disconnection. Seeking relief, Henry began to frequent luxurious places, hoping to find some meaning or satisfaction. He found himself in exclusive clubs, surrounded by people who seemed to have everything he now possessed: money, status, comfort. but the truth was that inside he felt more out of place than ever. Every high-profile event he attended only served to amplify his discomfort. Henry observed the empty conversations, the forced laughter, and wondered if those people felt as lonely as he did. The wealth, which he once believed would bring happiness and resolve his problems, now seemed to be a barrier, isolating him from the real world and from the people who truly mattered. Instead of filling the void he felt, each night spent in those luxurious environments only intensified his sense of loss. Henry began to drift further away, not just from Elizabeth, but from himself. He let the nights pass, wrapped up in parties and events, but never finding the peace or purpose he desperately sought. The laughter around him sounded hollow. The toasts and celebrations meant nothing. At the end of each night, when he returned home, he felt lonelier than ever. The wealth that should have been a blessing was turning into a curse, slowly consuming his spirit. While Henry lost himself in his own solitude, Elizabeth fought to maintain stability in the mansion. She clung tightly to routine, trying to keep up an appearance of normalcy for the children. Determined not to let their newfound fortune change them, Elizabeth insisted that Sophie and Lucas continue attending public school, refusing to yield to their increasingly extravagant demands. But it was a constant battle. Sophie, enchanted by the luxurious life that now seemed within reach, begged for trips and expensive clothes. Lucas, influenced by the new reality, desired the latest gadgets and toys. Elizabeth did her best to keep her children's feet on the ground, but Henry's emotional absence made everything more difficult. He was physically present at home, but his spirit seemed to be somewhere else, distant and unreachable. With each passing day, Elizabeth felt the weight of the family resting entirely on her shoulders. She felt alone, trying to maintain family unity, but with a growing sense that she was failing. The breaking point came one night when Henry didn't come home, preferring to stay at one of those events he used to frequent. Elizabeth lay awake in bed for hours trying to sleep, but the insomnia brought on by worry was relentless. Finally, when the tears came, she could no longer hold them back. Crying alone in the bedroom was the bitterest reflection of her reality, a reality in which, despite all the money, she was losing the family she had always wanted to protect. What had started as a dream of financial security was turning into a nightmare of loneliness and disconnection. Consumed by loneliness and the weight of his choices, Henry decided he needed some time alone, away from everything and everyone. He remembered a cabin in the mountains that he had visited with Elizabeth in the early years of their marriage, when they were both young and full of dreams. The cabin, hidden among tall pines and surrounded by almost absolute silence, seemed like the perfect place to find the peace he so desperately needed. Upon arriving at the cabin, Henry was flooded with nostalgia. Every detail of the place seemed laden with memories, from the nights he and Elizabeth spent talking by the fire, to the plans they made for the future, and the simplicity that, at the time, felt like all they needed. Sitting in front of the fireplace, Henry was confronted with the harsh reality of his choices. Wealth, instead of solving his problems, had only exacerbated the fissures that already existed in his life. As the fire crackled before him, Henry mentally revisited the years of their marriage, from the happy days of youth to the recent months of turmoil. He felt a sharp pain as he realized how much he had lost, not just in terms of connection with Elizabeth, but also with himself. The simplicity and happiness they once experienced felt so distant now, almost unattainable. Henry began to question whether the fortune was really worth the price they were paying. It was as if, in the pursuit of security and comfort, he had drifted away from what truly mattered. The cabin, which once represented a refuge of peace, now felt like a cruel reminder of what he and Elizabeth had lost. Henry knew he couldn't continue living like this, but he also didn't know how to repair the damage that had been done. He wondered, with deep sorrow, if there was still something left to salvage, if there was still time to save his marriage, his family, and himself. As the fire burned slowly, Henry decided that he could no longer run away. If there was something to be saved, he would have to find the courage to face the truth and take control of his life once again. The cabin in the mountains had given Henry the time and space to reflect on the choices that had led him to this breaking point. When he finally returned to the mansion, he felt more determined, yet also fearful of what lay ahead. He didn't know how to fix things, but he knew something had to change. As he entered the house, he was met with a dense silence, the kind that only exists between two people who, once so close, are now as distant as strangers. Elizabeth was waiting for him in the kitchen, her fragile figure illuminated by the cold light streaming through the window. Elizabeth's face was marked by fatigue and pain. She hadn't slept well since Henry had distanced himself, and the previous night had been particularly difficult. When Henry walked in, she slowly stood up, as if the weight of everything she wanted to say was almost beyond her strength.
Henry, we're no longer us.
She began, her voice breaking with contained emotion. It was as if the words had been torn from her, a confession she had avoided for too long. Henry tried to look away, but Elizabeth held him by the shoulders, forcing him to meet her gaze. She wouldn't let him escape this time.
This isn't about the money. It's about us. We are losing ourselves. We need to do something now, or we will destroy each other.
She pleaded, her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. The strength in her voice was that of a woman fighting to save what little remained of their marriage. In the face of Elizabeth's desperation, Henry finally broke down. He had no more defenses, no excuses, no place to run.
Liz, I'm lost.
He admitted, his voice hoarse and barely audible.
I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how we got to this point.
The words seemed to come from a deep place, a well of regret and confusion he could barely confront. Elizabeth felt her heart break a little more, but she also saw in this moment of vulnerability a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could still find a way back to each other. The conversation in the kitchen was the turning point they both needed. With their family's future at stake, Henry and Elizabeth knew they had to start over, a way to reconnect their lives and hearts. They decided to sell the luxurious mansion they had purchased after winning the lottery. That mansion, which should have been a symbol of success and security, now seemed to represent everything that had gone wrong. In its place, they chose a simpler yet modern home in a quiet neighborhood where they hoped to find the simplicity they had lost. The move was a painful process, but also cathartic. As they packed their belongings, Henry and Elizabeth came across an old photo album that had been forgotten in a cabinet. The pages were yellowed with time, but each photo was a portal to a time when their lives were simpler, happier. Sitting on the floor of their new home, they began to flip through the album together in silence. The photos showed moments of pure joy, the carefree smiles of a passionate couple, their children's first words, the small victories they celebrated with wine that once felt like a luxury. As they relived those moments, tears began to silently stream down their faces, not only for the loss of what they had, but for the hope that they might still recover what truly mattered. Henry held Elizabeth's hand, and for a moment the world reduced to that touch, to that bond which, no matter how fragile, still existed.
Let's start over, Liz. Let's remember who we were before all of this.
He said, his voice laden with determination and love. Elizabeth nodded, feeling a relief she hadn't experienced in a long time. They promised each other that this time they would do things differently, rebuilding not only the house, but also the love that had united them many years ago. Determined to reconnect his family and give new purpose to their lives, Henry made an unexpected decision. Instead of creating a foundation or making a financial investment in something impersonal, he chose to invest in something more intimate and personal, opening a small inn in the town they had just moved to. For Henry, the inn would be more than just a business. It would be a place where people weighed down by the burdens of the world could find peace and simplicity, a refuge where they could reconnect with themselves and their families, just as he and Elizabeth were trying to do. They found an old, dilapidated house, reminiscent of the one they had lived in at the beginning of their marriage. It was a simple house, but Henry saw immense potential in it. They decided to buy it and begin the renovation together, brick by brick. The physical work, although exhausting, brought a sense of accomplishment they hadn't felt in a long time. Each wall raised, each room restored, felt like a step towards healing the emotional wounds that wealth had inflicted. As they worked side by side, Henry and Elizabeth rediscovered the joy in the little things, the sound of laughter echoing through the empty hallways, the good kind of tiredness at the end of a long day's work, the coffee shared on cold mornings before starting another day of renovations. The simplicity of the project helped to bring them closer, reminding them that what truly mattered was not money, but the love and dedication they had for each other and their family. The inn, which had once been just an idea, began to take shape before their eyes. And with it, the love and respect that Henry and Elizabeth had for each other also began to blossom once again. Every nail hammered, every wall painted represented a new chance, a new beginning. And so, as the inn rose up, so did the hope that finally they were on the right path to rebuilding the life and love they had almost lost. The news of Henry and Elizabeth's new inn began to spread throughout the small town and beyond, attracting curious visitors as well as friends and family who had been estranged for a long time. The idea of a refuge where people could escape the everyday stress and reconnect with what truly mattered sparked the interest of many. The old, dilapidated house, now transformed into a warm and serene place, became a symbol of renewal and hope, not only for Henry and Elizabeth, but also for everyone who heard about the inn. Among the visitors who came to see the inn before its inauguration was Marjorie, the former neighbor whom Henry had helped in a time of need. Marjorie had always been a maternal figure for Henry and Elizabeth, especially during the difficult years of raising their children. Upon arriving and seeing what Henry and Elizabeth were doing, she was deeply moved.
You chose to create something so special, something that will truly make a difference in people's lives,
She said with tears in her eyes, awed by the transformation she was witnessing. Marjorie's visit was not just a casual encounter. She offered her assistance, suggesting that she could contribute her life experience and care. Henry and Elizabeth accepted her offer with open hearts, and Marjorie quickly became a sort of advisor and maternal figure within the inn. Her presence brought a sense of coziness and tradition that helped strengthen the bonds that had been weakened in the family. Over time, Henry began to realize that by helping others through the inn, he was also healing himself. Each smile from a visitor, each word of gratitude he received, seemed to erase a bit of the weight he carried in his heart. With the inn almost ready for its grand opening, Henry and Elizabeth realized it was the right moment to involve Sophie and Lucas in the project in a more meaningful way. Until then, the children had remained somewhat distant, still attached to the luxurious lifestyle they had adopted during the early years after winning the lottery. However, Henry and Elizabeth knew that to truly reconnect the family, everyone needed to participate in this new chapter. At first, Sophie and Lucas showed resistance. They were accustomed to comfort, to conveniences, and the idea of getting their hands dirty with physical work did not appeal to them. But gradually, as they began working alongside their parents, painting walls, assembling furniture, tending to the garden, something within them began to change. Sophie, who had always had a natural talent for art, rediscovered her passion as she painted murals on the inn's walls. Each brushstroke was a return to her roots, an expression of who she was before losing herself in the superficial shine of luxury. Lucas, in turn, found a new type of satisfaction in getting involved in building the garden. He, who had previously spent hours immersed in video games and gadgets, began to appreciate the simplicity and beauty of nature. Creating something tangible, something that grew and flourished under his care, brought him a new perspective on what truly mattered in life. For the first time in a long time, the family worked together, laughing and sharing moments of genuine joy. The nights, once silent and filled with tension, were now filled with lively conversations about the progress of their work, and the house was finally beginning to feel like home again. Finally, the day of the inn's inauguration arrived. The anticipation was great, not only for Henry and Elizabeth, but also for all those who had closely followed the journey of transformation of that old house. Henry and Elizabeth organized a small celebration in the garden, inviting friends, family, and the people who had helped make the inn a reality. The garden was immaculate, with the flowers planted by Lucas in full bloom and the murals painted by Sophie adorning the walls, giving the place a unique and welcoming aura. When everyone was gathered, Henry stood up to make a speech. He looked at Elizabeth, who was by his side, and felt a wave of emotion wash over him.
This place is not just an inn.
He began, his voice slightly choked.
It is a symbol of what really matters: family, love, simplicity. When we started this journey, we were lost, not knowing how to find our way back. But it was here, in this project, that we rediscovered what we always knew but had forgotten for a time.
Henry paused, taking a deep breath before continuing.
I want to thank Elizabeth for never giving up on me, even when I didn't know who I was anymore. And I want to promise all of you that from now on, our priority will be to keep these connections alive and strong. Because in the end, that is what really matters.
His voice broke slightly, and the emotion was visible in his eyes. The crowd applauded warmly, touched by Henry's heartfelt words. In that moment, under the stars and surrounded by friends and family, they knew they were on the right path. The inn was more than a business. It was a testament to their resilience, their love, and their renewed commitment to what truly mattered. As the months went by, the inn that Henry and Elizabeth had created became a refuge not only for the guests, but also for themselves. The constant flow of people brought life stories that resonated with their own experiences. Each week, new visitors arrived, carrying with them their pains, hopes, and the search for something they themselves could not yet define. Henry, who once avoided deep connections, now found himself inspired and profoundly touched by the stories he heard. The nights at the inn became moments of gathering and sharing. Henry and Elizabeth spent hours talking to the guests, listening to their stories with genuine attention. Many times they found themselves offering advice based on the lessons learned the hard way throughout their own journey. These interactions were not only therapeutic for the guests, but also for the couple, who felt increasingly reconnected to humanity and to themselves. One night, after a communal dinner, a couple staying at the inn approached Henry and Elizabeth. They had come to the inn during a difficult time in their lives, on the brink of divorce, seeking a last-ditch effort to save their marriage.
You saved us,
they said, tears in their eyes, holding the hands of Henry and Elizabeth.
This place gave us the chance to rediscover the love we thought we had lost.
The couple's words brought warmth to Henry and Elizabeth's hearts that they hadn't felt in a long time. For them, these moments were the true reward for everything they had been through, confirming that the decision to create the inn had been the best choice they could have made. The positive impact they were having on people's lives was, in fact, a redemption that money could never buy. One day, while supervising preparations for the arrival of new guests, Henry was surprised by an unexpected visit. At the inn's door stood Peter, the old schoolmate who months earlier had asked Henry for significant financial help. Henry felt his heart race at the sight of him, recalling the tough conversation they had and the weight of his refusal. However, upon looking at Peter, Henry noticed something different. The man standing before him was not the same one who had left frustrated and disappointed. There was a humility and calmness in Peter that hadn't existed before. Peter, visibly emotional, explained to Henry what had happened since that day. Henry's refusal had been a hard blow, but instead of giving up, Peter was forced to confront his own weaknesses and rebuild his life from scratch.
Thank you for not giving me the money, Henry,
Peter said sincerely.
You made me find my own strength. Today, I successfully run a small business.
Peter's words had a profound impact on Henry. He felt a mix of relief, pride, and a new understanding of the value of saying no when necessary. It was a powerful turning point in his life, a lesson that helping others does not always mean giving them what they ask for, but sometimes helping them discover their own strength and resilience. The reunion with Peter further solidified Henry's conviction that the choices they made, though painful at the time, were the right ones. That night, after all the guests had retreated to their rooms, Henry and Elizabeth found themselves on the inn's porch, gazing at the stars shining in the clear sky. The tranquility of the place, the soft sound of crickets, and the fresh aroma of nature around them created an atmosphere of peace that they hadn't experienced in a long time. Sitting side by side, they began to talk about everything that had changed since the day they won the lottery.
I thought that money would be the solution to all our problems.
Henry said, his voice soft and thoughtful.
But what really saved us was losing almost everything to finally understand what truly matters.
He turned to Elizabeth, and their eyes met. The expression of understanding and love on Elizabeth's face reflected everything they had been through together. Elizabeth nodded, a calm smile on her lips.
I thought so too, Henry. But the truth is, I've never felt as at peace as I do now.
She looked around at the inn they had built together, a symbol of the rebirth of their lives and the love they had rediscovered.
Here, with you, with our children, and with the people who come to us searching for something we were also looking for. I finally feel that we've found our place.
Henry took Elizabeth's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers.
Let's continue living like this, Liz. Simplicity, love, and connection with the people around us. We don't need anything more.
The silent commitment between them was sealed in that moment under the stars, with a promise to live a life focused on what truly mattered. As the night wore on, Henry and Elizabeth stayed on the porch, enjoying the serenity that enveloped them. They knew that the path to get there had been hard, filled with challenges and painful lessons, but they also knew that, at last, they had found what they were looking for, and for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel the need for anything more. The inn, the stars, the silence of the night, and the renewed love between them were all they needed to feel complete and at peace. With the inn operating at full capacity and bringing peace not only to the guests but also to themselves, Henry and Elizabeth decided it was time to revisit the place where it all began. The small town where they met and built their first memories as a couple held a special significance, a reminder of who they were before all the turmoil that wealth brought. The drive was smooth, marked by conversations about the past, how much they had grown and changed, and the lessons learned along the way. As they passed through the familiar streets, they noticed how little the town had changed. It was as if time had stood still there, preserving every detail of their memories. At one point, as they turned a corner, Henry spotted a small supermarket. It was the same one where, years ago, he had bought the bottle of wine that had initiated his journey of self-discovery and redemption. Driven by a sudden wave of nostalgia, Henry asked Elizabeth to pull over. Without explaining, he got out and walked into the supermarket as if being drawn in by an invisible force. Inside the supermarket, Henry walked down the aisles as if he were in a dream, until he found the wine section. And there it was, the same bottle, the same golden label that he had held with so much hope and desperation on that fateful night. He picked it up, feeling the weight of the history it carried. When he returned to the car, Elizabeth looked at him curiously.
Why did you buy the wine, Henry?
She asked, a gentle smile on her lips. Henry looked at the bottle, then back at Elizabeth and smiled in return.
Because this is where it all started, and I think I'm finally ready to close the chapter.
Henry's words carried a deep meaning, and Elizabeth understood immediately. They laughed together, but the laughter soon turned into tears of joy. It was as if, by buying that bottle of wine, Henry was sealing a chapter of their lives, finally ready to move forward, at peace with the past and the choices they had made. Back at the inn, Henry and Elizabeth decided to organize a special dinner to celebrate the new chapter they were beginning. They invited all their friends, family, and some of the most memorable guests who had passed through the inn, people whose lives had been touched by the work and love they had poured into that place. The dinner took place in the inn's grand hall, illuminated by soft lights and decorated with the flowers Lucas had planted and the murals Sophie had painted. The atmosphere was filled with laughter and animated conversations, a celebration of life and the connections they had cultivated. As the dinner progressed, Henry and Elizabeth shared their stories, reminiscing about the good and the difficult times. They laughed, cried, and expressed their gratitude for everyone who was there. But the most emotional moment of the night came when Sophie and Lucas, now adults, stood up to toast their parents. Sophie, holding her glass with a serious yet emotional expression, looked at Henry and Elizabeth and began to speak.
You taught us what is truly important in life,
Sophie said, her voice choked with emotion.
and for that, we are eternally grateful. It wasn't easy, but we learned so much from you. We learned that the value of things is not in their price, but in the love and dedication we put into each moment.
She paused, tears shimmering in her eyes. Lucas, standing beside her, added,
I never thought that losing something could teach us so much about what really matters. Thank you for not giving up on us, for showing us that even in difficulties, there is a way back.
The toast was made, and the room filled with applause and tears, a collective expression of gratitude and love that Henry and Elizabeth would never forget. For them, that moment was the confirmation that everything they had gone through, all the challenges, the losses, the struggles, was worth it. After dinner, with the guests saying their goodbyes and the inn returning to its usual tranquility, Henry and Elizabeth went back to the porch. It was their favorite place, where they could relax and reflect on the day. The bottle of wine that Henry had bought during the trip sat on the table, waiting to be opened. With slow and deliberate gestures, Henry opened the bottle and poured 2 glasses. They toasted, but not only to the future. It was a toast to the past, to the lessons they had learned, to the mistakes they had made, and to the strength they had found to rebuild their lives.
Liz, if we had to go through all of this again, I would do it without hesitation.
Henry said, his voice filled with sincerity and love. He looked deeply into Elizabeth's eyes, knowing that despite all the challenges, he wouldn't change a thing. Elizabeth, touched by the depth of Henry's words, held his hand firmly.
I would too, Henry. Every moment was worth it.
She smiled, a smile full of love and acceptance. As the stars shone above, they shared a kiss, sealing not only the night but everything they had achieved together. The imaginary camera slowly pulls away, showing the inn illuminated in the distance, a beacon of hope and redemption for all who pass through. The soft light of the stars bathes the place as the tranquility of the night envelops Henry and Elizabeth, now secure in the certainty that in the end, they had finally found true happiness. The journey was long, full of ups and downs, but in the end, they discovered that the true value of life was not in what they possessed, but in who they had become along the way. The story of Henry and Elizabeth shows us that sometimes you need to lose everything to finally understand what truly matters. The money brought luxury and power, but also revealed the fragility of their lives. In the end, it was love, simplicity, and human connection that saved them. And you, what do you truly value in your life? Could what you're seeking be beyond the material? If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Don't forget to watch the next recommended video by clicking the card on the screen. Thank you for watching.